This wasn't a flashy feud. It didn't trend on headlines every week, but within reggae circles, it mattered. It represented a larger conversation about leadership, spirituality, and who gets to define consciousness in music. Sizzla and Capleton became symbols of two different approaches to the same mission. And for years, Sizzla stayed mostly quiet about it, until later. Because with time, age, and reflection, the fire cooled enough for words to finally surface. But guess what? In Jamaican music, few arguments ever truly die. They just change voices. One of the loudest debates for decades now has been about who really sits at the top, who carries the crown, who represents reggae and dancehall in its purest form. Some fans swear that Sizzla owns reggae outright, pointing to his endless catalog and spiritual depth. Others push back hard and say Capleton's style, his fire, and his presence push him to a higher level altogether. And that argument has never had a clear winner. You see, the reason this debate never fades is simple. Sizzla and Capleton stand on similar ground, but they walk it in very different ways. Both are deeply rooted in Rastafari. Both speak about Babylon, oppression, justice, and black liberation. Both reject shallow music and put meaning before comfort. But how they sound, how they move, and how they connect with people couldn't be more different. Sizzla's voice is his greatest weapon. He can sound calm and melodic, almost soothing, pulling you in gently with a tune that feels like a chant and a prayer at the same time. Then, without warning, he can flip the switch and come at you raw, emotional, and urgent, like a man who has too much truth to hold inside. That ability to move between singing and DJing became his signature. It made his music flexible, unpredictable, and deeply personal. You never knew if the next track would make you reflect quietly or raise your fist in the air. Capleton, on the other hand, doesn't glide, he charges. From the moment he touches the mic, you feel the heat. His voice is rough, intense, sometimes sharp, sometimes almost burning through the rhythm. There's nothing polished about it, and that's exactly the point. Capleton sounds like conviction. His flow feels natural, like it's coming straight from his chest without stopping to ask permission. When he speaks, it feels less like a performance and more like a declaration. Lyrically, both men are preaching Rastafari, but the tone couldn't be more different. Sizzla often sounds like a teacher and a healer. His songs dive into spiritual lessons, social justice, and the pain of black people worldwide. He speaks about struggle, but also about love, especially for black women, faith, and inner strength. His words feel reflective, sometimes emotional, sometimes deeply comforting, like he's walking with you through the fire instead of shouting from the outside. Capleton's lyrics hit like a warning bell. He chants down Babylon with authority and anger, turning each song into a battlefield. His message isn't soft, and it isn't meant to be. It's about resistance, pride, and survival. When Capleton speaks, it feels like a confrontation, not just with the system, but with the listener too. He demands attention. He demands change. And he delivers it with fire every single time. Their careers reflect those differences clearly. Sizzla's output is almost unreal. Album after album, year after year, he never slowed down. Over time, his catalog grew massive, making it impossible to ignore his impact. Even people who criticized his volume had to admit that his consistency and dedication were unmatched. He lived in the studio, constantly recording, constantly releasing, constantly feeding his audience. Capleton moved differently. He never chased numbers or flooded the market. He took his time, releasing projects when they felt right, when the message was ready. He's always said music should be organic, not rushed. That approach meant fewer albums, but it also meant that each one carried weight. His focus leaned heavily toward live performance, where his energy could fully explode. On stage, that difference becomes impossible to miss. Sizzla commands respect through lyrics and presence, holding crowds with the power of his words. Capleton ignites crowds. His performances are intense, fiery, and emotional, often leaving audiences drained in the best way possible. You don't just watch Capleton perform, you feel it in your chest. And this is where the tension between them quietly lived. Not in open hatred, not always in direct shots, but in comparison. Fans, media, and the culture itself kept placing them side by side, forcing a rivalry even when neither man officially declared one. Two warriors on the same path, carrying the same banner, but fighting in very different styles. That contrast is what kept the conversation alive, and it's also what made any silence between them feel louder than words. But, as we all know, things don't always remain the same. It took an unexpected turn, because for all the debates, all the tension, and all the strong opinions surrounding these artists, there came a moment when the music world forced them to stop, look around, and make a decision that went far beyond lyrics, sound systems, or who carried the heavier crown. By the mid-2000s, reggae and dancehall were no longer just Jamaican conversations. The music had gone global in a serious way. Tours were being canceled. Festivals were pulling artists from lineups. Entire countries were closing their doors to performers whose lyrics were seen as promoting violence, especially against gay people. What once passed as raw street expression at home was now under an international spotlight, and the pressure was intense. Then in 2007, something happened that almost no one saw coming. Sizzla and Capleton, two artists often placed on opposite sides of reggae debates, stood in the same moment alongside Beenie Man. Three giants that had shaped generations of Jamaican music. And instead of clashing, they came together to make a public statement that shook the culture. They signed the Reggae Compassionate Act. This wasn't a small gesture. It was a formal pledge to renounce homophobia and remove lyrics that promoted violence against gay people from their music going forward. These were artists who, in the past, had openly used harsh language in songs that reflected long-standing cultural beliefs in Jamaica. Now, they were saying, publicly, that they were choosing a different road, and it didn't come without cost. By that time, all three artists had already lost serious money. Promoters backed out. Tours disappeared. Some estimates put the losses at up to £2.5 million over the years because of boycott campaigns led by groups like Stop Murder Music and UK-based gay rights organization Outrage. The message from overseas was clear: change or lose access to the global stage. When the act was announced, reactions were loud and emotional. Peter Tatchell, one of the key figures behind the campaign, called it a major breakthrough. He described it as an important milestone, praising the artist for rejecting homophobia and sexism and committing to music without prejudice. From his point of view, this wasn't just about reggae, it was about human rights, influence, and responsibility. Others echoed that feeling. Dennis L. Carney of the Black Gay Men's Advisory Group said it was a giant step toward restoring peace, love, and harmony in reggae music. To him, the move sent a powerful message that gay and lesbian people deserve to live without fear, whether in Jamaica, the UK, or anywhere else the music reached. For Sizzla and Capleton especially, this moment mattered in a deeper way. Both artists had always framed themselves as spiritual messengers. Both spoke about righteousness, justice, and moral order. Signing the act forced fans to ask a hard question: was this growth, compromise, or pressure? Some supporters praised the decision as maturity. Others accused them of bending to foreign demands. The debate split audiences just as fiercely as their earlier clashes had, and the controversy didn't stop there. While Sizzla, Capleton, and Beenie Man signed the act and pledged to uphold the right of all people to live without fear because of religion, race, gender, or sexual orientation, several other major Jamaican artists refused. Names like Elephant Man, 2K Tio, Bounty Killer, Vibs Cartel, and Buju Banton were publicly called out for not signing. Campaigners made it clear that the pressure on those artists would continue. That split changed the landscape. Suddenly, reggae and dancehall weren't just divided by sound or message, but by who was willing to adapt and who wasn't. For Sizzla and Capleton, the move didn't erase their past, but it reshaped how their future would be judged. It showed that even artists known for being uncompromising could reach a point where ideology, survival, and responsibility collided, and this moment also reframed their relationship with each other. The fire didn't disappear, the differences didn't vanish, but the narrative shifted. Instead of two artists standing on opposite sides of a cultural argument, they were now part of the same global conversation, one that forced reggae to confront how its power could heal or harm beyond the island. By the time the dust settled, one thing was clear. This wasn't about winning a clash or claiming a crown anymore. It was about legacy, about what the music would represent in the years to come. and whether the fire that once burned through lyrics could be controlled, redirected, or transformed into something bigger than rivalry itself. After all the tension, the debates, the outside pressure, and the years of fans choosing sides, something interesting started to happen with Sizzla and Capleton. Quietly at first, no big announcements, no dramatic speeches, just music, real music. Because one thing both men always agreed on, even when they didn't agree on anything else, was that the music comes first. Over the years, instead of clashing, they started crossing paths in the studio and on stages, and every time they did, it sent a clear message to fans. Whatever happened before didn't erase the respect. It just took time for things to settle. In 2011, that shift became impossible to ignore when Sizzla and Capleton linked up on the single "Got to Survive." This wasn't a random collaboration thrown together for hype. The song carried weight. It sounded like two veterans speaking from experience, not competition. The lyrics focused on struggle, resilience, and staying strong through pressure, which felt fitting considering everything both artists had been through publicly and privately. Hearing their voices on the same track again wasn't shocking because of beef. It was powerful because it felt earned. Then in 2013, the link-up went even deeper. Sizzla, Capleton, and Anthony B., three artists often spoken about as part of the same conscious reggae generation, came together on The Formula. The track was released as part of a remix package, but the moment mattered more than the format. These were three voices that had all faced criticism, censorship, and industry resistance, now standing together instead of apart. It didn't feel forced or political. It felt natural, like a reminder of what that era of reggae was always about in the first place. By this point, it was clear that whatever differences existed between Sizzla and Capleton were no longer driving the story. The rivalry energy had faded, replaced by something calmer and more grounded. Not friendship in the flashy sense, but understanding. That understanding showed itself again in 2018, when Sizzla and Capleton shared the stage with Barrington Levy during a live performance at the Breakfast Party. This wasn't a studio edit or a controlled release. This was live energy, raw vocals, and crowd reaction. Seeing them perform together in that setting told fans everything they needed to know. There was no tension in the air, no awkward distance, just artists doing what they've always done best. And even outside of their own direct projects, the pattern kept repeating. Sizzla and Capleton both worked with Ike on the track Bussa Blank, another example of how their musical paths continued to overlap without drama. No headlines, no controversy, just collaboration. What makes this part of the story important isn't just the songs, it's what they represent. These collaborations didn't erase the past, and they didn't pretend disagreements never happened. Instead, they showed growth. They showed that two strong personalities, both deeply rooted in belief and message, could move forward without needing to prove dominance. For fans who grew up watching the debates, picking sides, and arguing over who carried the real fire, these moments felt like closure. Not the dramatic kind, but the realistic kind. The kind that comes when artists mature, priorities change, and the music becomes bigger than ego. Sizzla and Capleton didn't reunite for headlines. They didn't collaborate to make statements. They simply allowed the music to speak again, and in doing so, they quietly rewrote the final chapter of a story that once seemed defined by tension. And maybe that's the most reggae ending possible. And that's a wrap. What do you think about their story? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you enjoyed this deep dive, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes reggae stories. Stay tuned for our next video. For years, fans have wondered what went on between Sizzla and Capleton. Was it rivalry, ego, different visions of what reggae should stand for? Or was it something much deeper that never made it to the microphone? Now, Sizzla finally speaks out, and we're breaking down the story behind the music, the rivalry, and the truth you haven't heard before. So stay locked in, because the story you think you know is only half of it. Born Miguel Orlando Collins in 1976, Sizzla burst onto the reggae scene in the early 90s as part of a new generation of artists who were not afraid to mix militant Rastafarian messages with the raw intensity of dancehall. His early career was marked by a relentless work ethic. Sizzla wasn't just recording songs, he was producing albums, performing on stages across Jamaica, and establishing himself as a conscious voice in a scene dominated by dancehall bangers and street anthems. Hits like Black Woman and Child, Thank You Mama, and Solid Jazz. A rock didn't just make him popular. They cemented Sizzla as an artist who could bring deep social commentary into mainstream reggae. He wasn't afraid to speak about poverty, injustice, spirituality, or the struggles of everyday Jamaicans, and that gave him a level of credibility and respect that set him apart from many contemporaries. By the mid-90s, Sizzla was on the radar internationally, performing in Europe, the US, and beyond, building a massive fan base who loved not only his voice, but the passion and conviction behind every lyric. Meanwhile, Capleton, born Clifton George Bailey III in 1967, came slightly earlier. Known as the Fireman, he rose to prominence in the late 80s and early 90s with hits like Tour, Jah Jah City, and Who Dem. Capleton became famous for his high-energy performances, deeply spiritual Rastafarian lyrics, and a persona that demanded respect both on and off the stage. Where Sizzla was militant and socially conscious, Capleton's approach was spiritual and fiery, often preaching purification, justice, and the cleansing power of fire through music. Both artists were deeply committed to Rastafari principles, but their interpretations and approaches often clashed. From the outside, people always assumed Sizzla and Capleton should have been brothers from day one. Same roots, same Rastafari faith, same era, same fire. Two artists preaching consciousness, righteousness, and African identity at a time when dancehall was drifting towards slackness and party vibes. But that assumption is exactly why the tension between them surprised so many people when it finally became visible. Because this wasn't a street beef, and it wasn't about charts. This was deeper. This was about ideology, leadership, ego, and who really had the right to speak for the culture. Sizzla Kalonji came up fast. By the mid-90s, he wasn't just another young artist, he was everywhere. Album after album, hit after hit, non-stop releases. He brought urgency into reggae, almost like he was racing against time. His lyrics were sharp, emotional, sometimes angry, sometimes uplifting, but always intense. Sizzla spoke like someone carrying a heavy burden, like the weight of injustice, poverty, and African history was sitting on his chest. Fans didn't just listen to Sizzla, they felt him. Capleton, on the other hand, had already established himself as a force before Sizzla fully exploded. Known as the Fireman, Capleton's presence was commanding. When he touched the stage, it felt ceremonial. His message was purification, burning out corruption, burning out negativity, burning out fake righteousness. Capleton wasn't just performing, he was preaching. And with that came authority. A lot of authority. That's where the friction quietly began. As Sizzla rose, he wasn't trying to follow anyone. He didn't see himself as a student or a junior. He believed his mission came directly from Jah, and that belief gave him confidence. Some would say stubbornness. Capleton, meanwhile, was used to being one of the main voices of conscious dancehall. He spoke openly about standards, about who was real and who wasn't, about what Rastafari should look like in music. To some younger artists, that guidance felt necessary. To others, including Sizzla, it sometimes felt like control. By the late 90s, people in the industry could feel it. Promoters noticed it. Other artists noticed it. Whenever Sizzla and Capleton were booked on the same events, the energy shifted. Not explosive, not violent, just tense. No smiles backstage, no link-ups, no public respect exchanges. Fans began picking sides without even fully understanding why. Sizzla never accused Capleton of being fake. That's important. The issue wasn't authenticity. The issue was approach. Sizzla felt that Capleton positioned himself as a gatekeeper, someone deciding who was righteous enough, conscious enough, or disciplined enough to represent Rastafari through music. Sizzla didn't like that. To him, righteousness was personal. Spirituality wasn't something another man could measure or approve. Capleton, from his side, believed discipline mattered. He believed artists had a responsibility to live the message they sang, and when he saw behavior he didn't agree with, he spoke on it. Publicly, directly, sometimes harshly. That rubbed Sizzla the wrong way, because Sizzla felt that public correction weakened unity and fed division, especially when both artists were already under international scrutiny. What made things more complicated was how massive both of them were becoming at the same time. This wasn't a case of an elder versus a newcomer. Sizzla was selling out shows overseas, dropping multiple albums a year, and building one of the most loyal fan bases reggae had ever seen. Capleton was still a dominant live performer, still respected as a spiritual leader in music. Two kings, one throne, same kingdom. Interviews from that era show Sizzla choosing his words carefully, but the frustration is there. He spoke about artists needing freedom, about not boxing people into one expression of Rastafari. He didn't name Capleton every time, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Capleton responded in his own way, emphasizing order, structure, and moral responsibility. No diss tracks, no stage clashes, just cold distance and philosophical opposition. By the early 2000s, the split was clear. They weren't enemies, but they weren't allies either. Their camps stayed separate. Their paths rarely crossed socially. When they did appear on the same bills, professionalism kept things calm, but warmth was absent. Fans expected fireworks, but what they got instead was silence, and sometimes silence speaks louder than insults. Sizzla has since explained that during those years, he felt misunderstood. He believed his message was being judged through someone else's lens. He wasn't interested in hierarchy. He wasn't interested in crowns or titles. He saw himself as a servant to the message, not a ruler of it. Any suggestion that he needed approval from Capleton or anyone didn't sit well with him. Capleton, meanwhile, never backed down from his standards. He didn't chase reconciliation. He believed time would reveal truth. To him, fire didn't need explanation. It just burned. That's what made the tension last so long. Neither man felt wrong. Neither man felt the need to apologize. And neither one wanted to weaken their principles just to satisfy public expectations of unity.